Welcome to HSDF the Podcast, a collection of policy discussions on government technology and homeland security brought to you by the Homeland Security and Defense Forum. In this second of a two-part series, our panel continues to share their thoughts on applying artificial intelligence algorithms for security orchestration and response, the threats posed by adversarial AI and how to defend against them, transitioning products from R&D to operational areas within the Department of Homeland Security and workforce training needs around AI. Featuring David Carroll, Associate Director, Mission Engineering, Cybersecurity Division, CISA. Donald Coulter, Senior Science Advisor, Cybersecurity, DHS S&T. Meghan Good, Vice President and Director of the Cyber Accelerator, Leidos. Dr. Reggie Brothers, from Undersecretary for S&T, DHS. This discussion took place at the HSDF Cybersecurity Symposium on July 10, 2024.
Can you elaborate more on what you're learning from your social scientists in terms of trust in the metrics?
Absolutely. I think what we're learning is that the way you present information to people matters, and it matters, and you have to be able to tailor that to the person, the individual, right? One system won't fit all. So different people, either whether they're in different roles or even different people in the same role, they still have their own personal preferences for how to interact. One of the things that is actually very important is to build their confidence is being able to believe that if something goes wrong, what can they do to roll those changes back? So not only in the design of the systems up front is thinking about the implementation and architecture around your implementation. How can you make sure that you build in confidence that, hey, this is how it works. You'll be able to see the results and the impacts of the changes that are being made, either whether they're recommended or even being implemented automatically. But this is an easy button way of how to roll back if you have major concerns with what's happening.
And David, what are you seeing in your environment?
I'll get to the rollback in a second because I run a large DevOps, SRE, MLOps team. So that's an interesting. I can give a practical experience with that. But I think before all that, what I think I'm trying to on another panel, I was asked, do folks have? I just keep saying anybody in this field, it has to have a basic data competency. Yeah. I think it was in this chair you just saw my CIO at CISA talking. We're big partners in data governance and trying to get the norms around this, right? He's leading that effort. We're working with them on that. I think those are just critical skills. The practical things that folks in the audience might want to do to get started is just start getting that literacy out there. And what you're going to encounter, from the social science perspective is, I really like doing this, and this is just another new thing. So what I've tried to tell folks is it really didn't matter to me. I went through that. We acquired a $100 million AI company at one of my positions, and I disrespected them as the head of data protection and cloud security. I just didn't understand. So I had to roll back, take the time to understand, get educated. I just had a little bit of time on my hands, went to UT, got myself that AI ML backing, and that was painful, but so I empathize. But I just think it's essential. I think if we aren't doing that for our employees, if we aren't giving them those opportunities, if we aren't teaching then all these concepts we're talking about, these tools are going to still become mythical. They're still going to think there's something they're not. And I try to teach it when I teach the classes on it, or I talk to folks. I said it in the green room. I'll say it here. It's math. It's not magic yet. It's not at parity. We aren't up there at where we're talking about things like iRobot or I could go on, but we're not there. So I think if we get that started and folks start to normalize it and understand it, and it gets less scary, I think that's when we start to see traction on some of these initiatives. Yeah. Now on rollback, it's very important. Canary testing for us, like when we push things out, we push it out through site reliability engineering. We practice everything that any software engineering group would practice. And what that does is it allows us to ease into these things as we see things and observe as we go along. There's no big bang. There's no, this is IOC, this is FOC, boom. That's a programmatic thing. Right? And when you're talking about the scale we're talking about, you have to start and you have to work your way up to it, because that's the only way you're going to see these things, these behaviors, these patterns that we're talking about. And that comes from things, places that we have labels on right now that folks don't pay as much attention to at the leadership side. Your DevOps team, your security operations team, your systems engineering team, the folks who are watching this, who have those placemats that say, yeah, this is what it should look like. And then all of a sudden something goes off. And then, the notional thing right now is, oh, well, let's go get data science. That's interesting. No, it's not interesting. It needs to be fixed. It's that type of thing. But without that discipline. So when folks are saying, hey, I want to go from a traditional, I go and I do a big bang to, I'd like to run, agile release, and I'd like to have full stack engineers looking this stuff over and then pushing it out. That is critical, because it's not just because you want those folks to have those great skills and everything. It's because that is the way that you ease into something in any global infrastructure, in any large enterprise.
But
go ahead.
If I could just jump in too, but I think that goes a lot too with R&D and S&T to production, to an operations environment. R&D, it works really great in the lab. And then you keep scaling up and you keep scaling up and scaling up. And then you need that site reliability engineering. You need that DevOps practice around it. And that, I think, drives adoption as well, of where you're very honest, like, this is R&D, this is a prototype. Yeah. It does great with this kind of protocol and this sort of data, this sort of attacks that we can detect. And knowing the bounds, and then how do you keep incrementally improving it, I think that makes the users then adopt it too, because you went through that. You had to go through all the valleys of tears.
Yeah, I think expanding that like MLSecOps pipeline to be inclusive of your development pipeline, your R&D pipeline. You get those people talking together, you get those systems talking together earlier, and you're thinking through the challenges of how do you share data between those systems, especially when a lot of times they are operating at different levels of like security and sensitivity. You're working through some of those problems that you're already going to have to solve even in the production system anyway, and building those relationships between those people that are going to be involved. So hopefully that's building trust.
I'll add at the end. I go further than that. I want my CRCX teams involved. They are bookends. This is what we were thinking about, and this is what the analytic was supposed to do. Did it really do that on the end? Because you can get into that mode where you're like, I got it done. It's okay. We're good. And then you don't get a feedback loop. And then you wonder why nothing is being, why did we get this data again? What was the operational mission? I don't remember. So that's the only thing I would add is your CRCX teams on both ends, like bookends, just watching that and spinning that in a continuous cycle. It's very valuable.
Let me ask you guys a question, because if I'm seeing the audience, I may have heard if I'm a leader in my organization, that I've got to give many of my people data science creds. What are you guys really saying? What level of education or fluency do you think a user has to have in order to be more comfortable with these tools?
I think there's a whole range, first off. Sure. But I do think there's easily available ones from like Coursera and these little nano degrees of how data science for dummies. I mean, there's so much out there right now that I think is very easy to consume. I think other ones are even just following things on OpenAI. I actually feel like OpenAI has done a great service to us all of making things very simple to use. But then I think it's all out there. Then at the other side of it, of practitioners, they have to have more in-depth knowledge. That's probably traditional education, but that's a whole lot experiential too, and of actually trying things out on these tools. I don't think I have a UT degree in it, though. So
no, I'm just saying that because it was one of the most painful things. I hate Python. I never want to see it ever.
But you have a point of view on it, and that's an important competency builder too.
The thing is, you have to also be empathetic to folks. It was a journey. It was not easy. It was painful. And it wasn't something I was used to. At that point, I wasn't even building things. I was a risk guy. Going, no, you can't do that. This is how it has to be built. And then they look at me and go, we can't use the data that way. If I were to tell you how many times a day I hear that where I work at CISA, well, we got PPNI or we got PI issues when maybe they aren't, maybe they're just assumptions, and that goes back to the labeling and everything. And we say, well, we can't really analyze then because we just don't have access. There's whys in there, and you got to remember, like the folks who are dealing with that, if they just get something from the privacy officer saying, nope, can't do that, then the whole thing just goes off the rails at too early of a stage where you're not actually pushing the envelope a little bit, because the machine's going to push the envelope for you. It doesn't care about your privacy impact assessment. The adversary doesn't care about your rules or your FISMA score. They don't care. And it's essential that we act ethically, we act this way, but it's also, if folks know more about the data, if they know more about how this works, and they're less, I don't even want to say they need to be expert at it. They just need to be less mystified by it. Like the ChatGPT thing, I like to joke around. I'm like, there's a reason why it can't spell things, right? There's a reason why pictures look kind of wonky. I asked it, I'm a Navy officer when I'm not doing this, and I said, hey, could you draw me a picture of an aircraft landing on a carrier? And I got this weird looking flying squirrel thing with wheels that was coming right down on the water. And I'm like, that's interesting. The model has no concept of what that term carrier means in this context. But that got me laughing, and you see the mistakes that it makes, and you hear about it on the news, and you say, well, we shouldn't, eat glue. We shouldn't do, but it's essential for folks to have that, because I still tell folks, all my team, I'm like, every one of you sitting there have the bigger cognitive machine. Use it, right? Be deliberative. You're the heuristic machine. You're more powerful. Give them that confidence. Give them that, get that mystification out of there, and let them go to work.
Thanks. We're running out of time, but I do want to touch one more topic. That's adversarial AI. So, Meghan, if you could give us a definition of adversarial AI, and then I'd like you guys to talk about what your concerns and how do you think we can mitigate this.
So I think there's a bit that I referred to as adversarial AI before. There are probably textbook definitions, but my working definition is really, with AI out there, ChatGPT even is a great example. There are ways to manipulate the data to find things around the model, ways to avoid being detected by a model, and ways to actually steal it or replicate it. And so there's a whole host of adversarial techniques being developed to do that. And the thing about adversarial AI for me is that it's very interesting as we're at an adoption point of more and more AI in our systems, and how are we preparing ourselves for that? And I think that really is something that's very easy for us to identify as cyber folks, because we're used to an adversarial domain. We're used to things always being in contest to the defenses that we have, and we have to build our defenses based on that. So exploring adversarial AI in that context makes a lot of sense. And I think for us, what we're doing is making sure that our models that we deploy are actually defensible, that we're actually able to already anticipate that adversarial pressure and then have ways to be resilient to it.
Yeah, one of the things I'm excited about is, even as we develop our tooling, so for instance, we have a program developing enhanced malware binary analysis and identification capabilities. But as an inherent part of that program, we're using adversarial AI to attack the tool even as it's being developed, to identify some of those flaws or weaknesses or potential vulnerabilities in the resilience of that tool and its efficacy, and finding new holes. Or, okay, we developed this, but what could go wrong? And then quickly addressing that and using AI to identify ways to address that to improve the efficacy of the tool. So I think, including as we learn more about adversarial uses of AI technology and adversarial attacks against AI-based systems, from a cyber perspective, we're probably in an advantage because we're always thinking adversarially, but incorporating that not only in our cyber programs, but in our tech-intensive programs in general, just having that adversarial mindset as you develop it and incorporating that into your program and your development plan is critical.
It is critical. And again, it's always a joke, right? There's the old book, How to Lie with Statistics, and then I just add hyperscale, because that's what we're talking about. Yep. But when you're talking about the ghost in the machine, the model, and an attack, yes. To that end, I think one of the things we're really focused on, whether it's AI or not, at least at CISA and at least in my division, is trying to be the what I would say is as the bellwether for secure by design. That's a big initiative at CISA. You're going to see a lot more of me talking with my friend Bob Lord on that, and it's essential that folks understand. To me, it's still basic knowledge, right? We get a lot of requirements. We get, okay, check the box, control, but what does count as adversarial? Because testing sometimes could seem, you won't always get the same results that you think. And some of that is actually good discovery. It's not necessarily adversarial. So, and when it's happening as fast as it's happening in these environments, you can quickly kind of just check the wrong box and let it go and not know the difference between something that has a necessary effect and maybe is teaching you something, and something, you could kill it too quick. and that's the danger, right? It's a very fine line, and I think it goes way back to teaching folks that this is a different domain, that we are doing things differently, that compute, IT, whichever way we want to call it, at least in cyber, is evolving into something else, and we've got limited time to get on board with that. It's not coming from cloud, where for most, including myself, took years to get my head around that. This is the time slice is just tiny compared to that.
Do we have time for a couple of questions? Any questions? Sure.
I'd like to go back to secure by design, because I hear a lot of the AI talking about incident response, sort of that attack. What's the other side? Sorry. What about the other side? Does AI have anything to play in terms of building systems more securely?
Of course. At DHS, we've got the big responsible AI initiative, and that trails right down into our cyber focus. Again, if you're not actually observing, we can't just, and I'm just going to speak to government in general, and maybe big integrated on the commercial side too. You can't just offload that and say this is the requirement. You have to have responsible and comprehensive understanding of what it is you're putting out there, and whether that's a model or a system or a program. And so we've just kind of said, okay, well, this is a thing. And it's not a it's been a competency to everybody in the room for years, right? Most of us work in this environment. But to the average person out there, it's just IT. I mean, we all deal with that with our families, right? We're just the IT person who does this stuff. And so I think that's the revolution, right? And you'll see things like, secure code, secure binaries. We're going deep on this stuff. Secure models is just another version of that. It's just we have to think in terms of, and tying it into zero trust and everything, we have to think compromise as a practical matter. And just like anything else, the day you put it on the wire, whatever change it is, it's probably on its way to being, compromised in one way, shape, or form. So if we get that ideology and we take a breath and we understand that it's always going to be that way, then we start to learn, right, how to get faster and better.
Questions? Sure.
So, yeah, thanks. Really interesting panel. I guess this question would be for Meghan, but really could be for anybody. You've mentioned that having AI in our enterprises adds new attack surface, and I certainly agree with that. But I'd like to know sort of what you think that attack surface is. What are the areas of new risk that deployment of AI brings to us that you're most concerned about or most working on?
Right. Great question, Neil. Thank you. So I think with that, there's similar systems, right? It's already deployed. AI gets deployed as software, right? It gets deployed as with data coming in, data coming out, right? And a decision there. So from the actual surface itself, it's not that much of an evolution to what we've already been doing. But I think the struggle becomes what you're doing with the data and the actions that you're taking, the responses going on, and the changes that you might make, which would modify your attack surface very quickly. Are you blocking something? Are you moving something? And I actually am excited about the application of AI and it having that with even deception capabilities. And so what you can change, how you can change your attack surface faster, but add a whole lot more complexity in the mix there. But I think with what I'm seeing is that there's just another avenue of a manipulation to the data that then is changing what we do to respond. And there's a bit of it that with learning systems and reinforcement learning that we're deploying, it's happening in ways that we might not be able to explain at scale yet. So I do think there's some uncertainty and a risk factor that's added in as well.
Questions?
As a follow-on to the previous question, thinking about the fact that code assistants have been around for a while, we've been training them for a while. Have we looked at any adversarial poisoning of open source, of Stack Overflow questions, and the other things that the AI coding models have been trained on? If so, what are we doing to kind of mitigate that problem?
Yeah.
Why don't you get started?
That's a big we, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can, I think some of the stuff that's posted on OpenStack is like even without AI, is already poisoning our software. but yeah,
not at all.
But I do think that you're right, that as a major concern is that how are we vetting and validating the type of stuff that's out there, and this really affects a lot of not only the stuff that's like on these websites, but also that's getting pulled into our open source software. So being able to understand and identify the prevalence, being able to have an ongoing relationship with where did this code come from, where did it get updated, who made changes to it, what does that thing do? I think these generative AI capabilities will continue to get better and better at being able to reason upon and explain what particular codes do, and that we will be able to identify those and see those and make better risk-informed decisions about what to incorporate into the software that we're actually building and using and deploying. But I think that's still a major area of concern, that it's always going to be out there. People are going to be poisoned. People are going to be putting fake malicious packages or co-opting packages that were at one time were trusted, but someone forgot to pay their registration and someone else got a hold of it and inserted something malicious there. So I think that's a huge problem that hasn't been solved yet from my perspective. Maybe he's solved.
Nope, hasn't been solved. No, but we're working hard, right? And again, there are, folks, there's a balance there too, because the whole purpose of open source is collaboration, is advancement, is ingenuity, right? You don't want to stifle that. But again, I've seen varying levels of this in varying different environments, both commercially and government, where you have to take a rational approach. And so I've seen bastion versions of Git where you bring it in, you scan it, and you make sure. But that, unfortunately, will not survive this next iteration, right? Because it's going to be happening faster than we can get it through those old net locks and balances. So I think we've got a physical problem as far as space and time and how fast we can move against the variability of the AI. Mm-hmm. And we've also got to understand and respect the philosophical problem. And that goes back to, again, the traditional, I put a stamp on it and everything's certified and we're good, changes in the next 10th of a second in this environment. So we have to kind of be practical as well and be respectful of the fact that the whole purpose in doing this is to accept some risk and in the factor of innovation. So it's a hard problem. There's not a silver bullet to that one. I don't know there ever will be.
And I don't know there's one organization that can do it.
It's a community thing.
It's a community, a collective. But then I think the challenge there is what do we each do as part of that, right? And who you can control your additions to it. You can control what you take from it and how you update it over time. But you're still responsible for that change over time too.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. But I really want to thank wonderful panelists for a great session.
Thank you for tuning in to HSDF the Podcast. You can follow this podcast on any major podcast platform. Visit hsdf.org to learn more about the Homeland Security and Defense Forum.